Okay, so now this is a bit more technical, and it's a really good question. I mean, most people would have seen the word SaaS, and there's BaaS, SaaS, and there's all these funny like acronyms, right? But software as a service, PaaS, platform as a service. There's infrastructure as a service. So this whole new area of as a service, where you can get anything as a service, or everything as a service as well, right? It all goes back down to cloud computing, where nowadays you can access certain services without having a physical infrastructure. Meaning, a company can export its services as a software, as opposed to you getting in-house, getting a full package or getting the full infrastructure within your within your premises. So think of it classically. This is a very basic example, but just as an example, uh, when there was no such thing as your Google Drive or your OneDrive or your Dropbox and these things, where there was no cloud storages, you'd have to have a USB or an external hard drive. These big hard drives, and before, going back 10, 15 years, if you remember how big these hard drives would be, they'd be huge, right? And now they've been downsized. But in those days, right, the hard drives, external hard drives anyway, used to be huge, and you couldn't get so much space. I mean, 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes were probably the most you could get on a computer, and if you're lucky, 1 terabyte. I remember back in 2010, I was looking for a laptop. It was hard to find a laptop, at some stages of 1 terabyte, for a good decent price. So you'd have to physically have the storage capability and the physical, presence of the hard drive to store data. And so you'd have to have the maintenance costs, you'd have to have purchasing costs, you'd have to have the space for it and everything that brings with it. Now, magnify that to a company and to a business. Think about a huge business, a huge company which would need, forget 1 terabyte. It'll need so much, like thousands of terabytes, right? It'll need millions potentially for the stuff, the data that they have. Now imagine storing all of that kind of data, the kind of systems you need in place, the infrastructure you need in place, the maintenance that's required, the personnel that's required, right? You'd have to bring all of that in-house to offer those services. Now, what software as a solution SaaS has done is it's allowed to cut all of that out. So what it's done is it's completed, because of cloud computing and the development of cloud services, you can now access all of this kind of storage facility without even having a single physical presence in your store, in your company, in your warehouse. You don't need any kind of physical, infrastructure. All your hardware is no longer required. It's purely drained to software. Hardware is no longer required, and therefore you can outsource all the hardware to somebody else. You're just paying for the software, right? And all your data now is kept elsewhere. It's stored on the cloud and is accessible anywhere. And so, if coming back to our banking, or this idea of banking as a software, that's what it comes down to. This idea of where you are now benefiting from banking services, but remotely. It's not that you need, potentially, you don't need to have all the banking infrastructure licenses, but yet you can access banking experiences. So I guess when we talk about banking as a service, to summarize, it just describes a model in which licensed banks can then integrate uh, digital services within their platforms. So banking as a service is more about these licensed banks tapping into cool smart services from other providers, but they integrate that into their products, right? And they can integrate it in other places as well. So that's really the banking as a service. It's about integration, smart, smooth integration, where it's only the software that's being integrated without any of the hardware and without any of all the cumbersome elements that come with running a bank and having a banking license. Many of us would have seen, an example that came to my head. So your supermarkets. Some supermarkets that you go to might have their own credit card, right? they might have some kind of bank account, right? So, for example, we have in the UK we have something called Tesco, we have Sainsbury's. They offer their own credit cards. What is that? It's the banking products, right? These traditional banks are offering their banking services, right, to non-banks. So it's being passported to these, you could say, non-banking platforms and retail. These are retail shops, right? They're offering banking services. How is that possible? It's because of these APIs that we have. And we have our fintech team here. They can go into what APIs are in more detail. But they have these webhooks and APIs which allow, it's just basic coding, which allows these non-banks, these retail supermarkets, to now access banking services. So one is the integration, where banks, traditional banks themselves can integrate new services, but then really BaaS and banking as a service comes here in the light where you have supermarkets, you have the traditional stores, superstores, which offer banking services, and that's really where you can see banking as a service, because a supermarket is not a bank. A supermarket is not a bank. How can it offer a credit card? How can it offer, a bank account? It's just doing it through a BaaS, a banking as a service, because they've purchased the banking as a service from a bank. That's all it goes down to. So yeah, I mean, if you see Taif offering you, a credit card, or Taif of a Sharia compliant credit card, that is, or Taif offering you a bank account, then no, it's not. Taif has not become a bank, rather it's using banking as a service.
Islamic finance learning made simple and memorable.